This is Raythe from Raythe Reign. I'm an author of serialized gay romance fiction. Every week on this podcast, I'll be reading a chapter from one of my gay fantasy shifter serials called Dragon's Reign. I'll explain at the break how you can find out more about this story and others I write. So let's get to it. Chapter 61. Purr. Valerius picked Caden up into his arms. The young man let out a delighted whoop. Caden wrapped his arms around Valerius's neck. "Where are we going?" Caden asked. Had the young man not understood that Valerius intended to make love to him here, in his tower, in his bed? He tipped his chin up to indicate where they were headed. "I like cool sheets against my bare skin, don't you?" Valerius challenged. Color flooded Caden's cheeks. "Oh, most definitely." The earlier whoop was repeated several times as he raced from platform to platform that crawled along the outside wall of the tower. They passed by a platform solely for his clothes. Caden reached over as they passed to finger the leather and silk he had teased Valerius about earlier, even as he himself wore it with such evident pleasure. "Look at all those boots," Caden chuckled. "I love the fur trim, though those look almost like something a Larian would wear. The gods forbid." Valerius laughed. He thought of his fellow dragon shifter and Alarian's comments about him seducing Iolaire right from under their noses. Alarian was right, of course, even though he had not made his intention towards Caden clear, at least not in words. "It is because my seduction of Caden is not the reason he is uninterested in them. He has all his friends and family here." But was that true? They reached the topmost platform where he had one of his beds. There were two, one on the ground floor of the tower where Shione had discovered him, which was heavily curtained and tucked away from the world. That was the one where he could avoid sunlight and could cocoon away from the world. But this one, the one he took Caden to, was fully open to the air. It was a custom-made mattress, twice the size of a standard king, with a simple platform frame of maple. The bedding was white and soft grays, like the first touch of twilight. It reminded him of sleeping in the sky on a mountain. He set Caden down on the cool bedding. Immediately, the young man stretched out, his arms nowhere near able to touch the edges. Caden closed his eyes and let out a contented sigh. "Oh man, this is nice." Caden dragged out the last word. "I don't think I ever want to leave." "I may not let you," Valerius thought. "You look so right here in my bed, Caden." He winced a little, though. He really did sound like one of those actors in the werewolf mate romances. He smirked then as he realized how very jealous the werewolves would be to know he had a mate. The very thought came unbidden and naturally, but it had him freezing. He immediately looked at Raziel to see what his spirit would say in response to that. But Raziel said nothing, because Raziel was asleep. But just like him, Raziel was not sleeping alone. In all his years, he had never seen anything quite like this. There was still a separation, a hazy line, but Valerius could see both Raziel and Iolaire. They were curled up asleep, but their foreheads were practically touching. Iolaire's much smaller head was pillowed on one claw, while Raziel's claws were outstretched toward the white dragon's spirit, as if wanting to hold on to Iolaire. He thought to tell Caden about it, but he decided not to. How would Caden react to their spirits loving each other like this? And that's what it was. His grouchy, fiery Raziel had never looked so at peace or content before. But now... "Valerius?" Caden had cracked open his eyelids in the midst of him frisking against the cool sheets. He snapped out of his shock. Yes, my Caden." "My Caden?" Caden twinkled at him. Valerius decided that action, rather than words, would serve him better. He was a man of few words after all, but his actions were legendary. So he launched himself on top of Caden. Caden's reaction was perfect. His mouth opened in an O of shock, and he closed his eyes tightly as Valerius pounced on him. He landed, though, on his hands and knees so that he didn't actually land on the young man. He lowered his face so that he was half an inch from Caden's. The young man opened his eyes again to peer up at him once the bed stopped jiggling. "Meep?" Caden asked. Valerius grinned and kissed Caden's nose this time. "Meep indeed." Caden broke into laughter and wrapped his arms around his neck once more. Time seemed to stretch and elongate until it was like a ribbon of silk rolling into an unfathomable distance. This was what eternity was like, and he felt it with Caden. To go along this path together, and not alone. Wasn't that what Caden had offered him earlier? The young man showed a deeper understanding of his feelings at 25 than he had known countless times since that. Even until Caden said it, he had not truly quantified and explored what he felt, especially since taking over rulership of this world. But Caden had put it neatly and easily into words. He smiled down at the young man. It wasn't a bright and happy smile, but more a tender one. Caden's eyes widened in wonder. Yet Valerius knew something was troubling Caden that was not necessarily greater than Sarai's death, but was striking at the core of the young man. Caden had no poker face. Even when he smiled and laughed, if something was bothering him, it showed in his eyes. And it was there now, along with a great deal of desire and impishness. "Are you happy?" Valerius found himself asking. Caden's eyes went wide again, and he answered rather breathlessly, "Yeah, of course." "Even with all the burdens put upon you?" Valerius searched his face. Caden tightened his arms around Valerius's neck. "Yeah, because I have you." Valerius's throat tightened to the point where words were simply not possible. He leaned down and kissed Caden fiercely until they both needed to breathe. "You know, I'm really excited for us to make love because the way you kiss just blows me away," Caden murmured. Valerius chuckled, his voice restored. "What about my actions by the pond? Are those not as memorable?" Caden's pupils grew larger and his lips parted as his breathing increased. That was completely unforgettable, but I think your kisses tell me more." Valerius carted his hands through Caden's short hair, playing with the silky strands. Caden pushed up against his touch. "Do they?" "You kiss me like you mean it," Caden explained. Valerius saw Raziel's head moving closer to Iolaire's. The hazy line grew a little hazier. "I do mean it." But what did he mean? Were they talking about the same thing? When he wasn't letting himself think, he seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go. There was no doubt. But then he would remind himself of Caden's youth and inexperience, about how it was a huge commitment for both of them, for what it would mean in terms of what happened next. He could not do casual with Caden, which was an answer in and of itself because he had always been casual with everyone else. Caden stroked his cheek. "I'm losing you again." "Never." His treacherous mouth had no sense. He should be reeling this back, making it light and airy as if they were just going to enjoy each other's bodies and nothing more. Caden's hands moved from his neck and cheek to his shirt. The young man stuck his tongue out of the side of his mouth as he concentrated on undoing the buttons. It was adorable. Valerius could not help running his thumb along Caden's bottom lip. Caden grinned, but didn't stop unbuttoning his shirt. Valerius studied that beautiful face. Caden was beautiful, but it was his sense of humor, kindness, enthusiasm for life overall that made him so attractive. Valerius traced those lovely features with his fingertips. He felt a whoosh of cool air as Caden pulled the tails of his shirt out of his pants and then urged him to lift one hand and then the other so the shirt could be shucked off and tossed to the side. Caden's hands fell to the button and fly of his leather pants. "Shouldn't you take your shirt off, Caden?" Valerius lifted his right eyebrow. "I have no pants." Caden watched as Valerius jogged down the steps to where a shower and bath just stood out in the open. Not that he was looking at the shiny chrome or sleek fixtures, though he definitely wanted to bathe there, but instead he was gazing at Valerius. Real, Caden thought. This is real and not casual. The thought that maybe Valerius was only with him because he was the 9th dragon shifter tried to intrude on his good thoughts. Valerius liked him, maybe more than liked him, letting him take all these liberties, opening his private lair, protecting Caden. These were all things that showed so much more of what Valerius felt, more than words ever could. He dated guys who could talk up a storm with wild proclamations of love, but Valerius could hardly open his mouth without tripping on his tongue when he spoke of emotional things. Valerius had opened a cabinet, and in his haste and eagerness to get back to Caden, he was simply tossing things over his shoulder. Some of them landed on the broad stone landing, but many more tumbled into space and landed on the ground floor of the tower far below. Caden's cheeks hurt. He was smiling so broadly. He had Valerius eager. Valerius was so experienced with sex that Caden had no hope that he wouldn't find things with him a little pedestrian. But Valerius seemed as excited as he was. Caden let out a breath. How did you get up here so fast? Caden gasped. Enthusiasm. Valerius cracked a grin, but he looked very determined. A delightful shiver wound its way down Caden's spine. Oh, prepare yourself for me, Valerius commanded. His voice was soft, but Caden sprung into action as if he had been shouted at. Valerius pressed a tube of lubricant into Caden's hands, even as his eyes never left Caden's face. He slumped, but Valerius caught him and pulled him up into his arms. Valerius was holding him. The Dragon King was shaking. His lips moved against Caden's left shoulder, kissing him and murmuring something in a language that Caden did not know. And as they caught their breath, and aftershocks of their orgasms ran through them, Caden heard a familiar yet unfamiliar sound. Iolaris. Purring, Caden said, half laughing and half touched, as his spirit continued to sleep. Valerius was silent for a moment, and then in a tone that was almost reverent, but definitely amused. Raziel is, too. I hope you enjoyed this week's chapter. Just a reminder that if you join Raythe Reign as a member, the membership is 15 to 20 episodes ahead of the free podcast. If you'd like to join and listen to all those extra podcasts, not to mention getting access to the other stories and manga on Raythe Reign, a link is down below.